Welcome to the first episode of Story of Greek Mythology. Before we get started, hit that like button. It really helps us out. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. Alright, now let's begin. There was nothing, no light, no space, no time, not even nothingness. This isn't a paradoxical statement. It's simply true because these things didn't exist yet. But how can we talk about something that has no existence? We can't. So we can only pretend that there is something to talk about and hope you'll go along with it. In this world without anything at all, there was one thing that most certainly existed, but we can hardly call it something, because it had no parts or edges, no inside or outside, no up or down. It just was. In other words, it was literally a void. And this is where our story starts. This is where the story of everything begins. We called this place chaos. Chaos was infinite and timeless. It contained within it all possibilities, but nothing was There was potential for mountains, but no mountain. There was potential for rain, but no rain. There was potential for beautiful women, but no women. All these things were mixed together in a primordial soup, but they weren't created yet. In modern physics, this primordial state is called a singularity. It's infinitely dense and unimaginably hot, and if you try to look into it, your eyes will burn out because it's unimaginably bright. But in the beginning, before there was light, brightness meant nothing. Chaos wasn't a place, so there was nowhere for light to shine. And light needs brightness and a place to shine in order to exist. And so chaos continued forever. Or maybe it continued for a moment. Or maybe it lasted for an eternity. Actually, that doesn't even make sense because eternity isn't measurable. So we can say it just always was. Then something happened. Something very unusual happened in the formless void. Something unprecedented. Something totally unexplainable. A tiny little bubble popped into existence. We'll call it the egg of creation. It was small, but its size doesn't matter here, because nothing had any size. It could have been bigger than the world, but we wouldn't be able to tell. Its color is irrelevant, because there was no light to reflect or emit. But let's say it was red, and what was inside of this egg is even more important because it was nothing. But again, technically, nothing isn't something. So there really wasn't anything inside of it either. This is where things are going to get really weird. Because this egg contains all of reality. Yet nothing is actually happening. It's impossible to understand. But it's also unnecessary because it doesn't matter. So let's move on to something a little bit less confusing. Let's talk about Earth. Actually, we shouldn't talk about Earth because it didn't exist yet. So instead, we'll talk about Gaia. Remember that word. It means earth in Greek. Now Gaia exists. She was born from the explosion of the egg. Some people think she exploded out of it, But that doesn't make sense because explosions need air or a flammable substance. Instead, let's say the egg simply opened up and Gaia stepped out. She is solid ground, mountains and rivers, valleys and plains, rocks and dirt. She's the entire earth, but Gaia is only part of the picture. If you remember, the egg had nothing inside of it. So if Gaia came from the egg, then what else came from it? Well, her 3 daughters did. Nyx was darkness, but that doesn't mean she brought night or that she cast shadows. In fact, there was no sun or moon to block light. Darkness was just the absence of light, which really didn't mean much of anything. Next was Erebus, who was darkness, but a different kind of darkness than his sister Nyx. He was darkness in the sense that he was black. He was also shadow and shade. He represented the things that darkness could produce, whereas his sister simply was darkness. Finally, the youngest daughter was Tartarus, and she represented the deep pit that lay beneath the earth. She was the Underworld. Technically, Gaia was also part of the Underworld, but Tartarus embodied its deepest depths. In some stories, she's depicted as a primordial goddess existing before the Titans and the gods. In others, she's the mother of the Titans. Together, they represent the first elements of order in the universe. Everything else will come from them, whether it's light or heat, stars or planets, humans or monsters. They are the basis of creation. But for now, let's leave them alone and return to chaos. Now, you might be asking yourself, if Gaia came from the egg, then what happened to the egg? To answer that question, we have to meet Pontus. He emerged from the remaining fragments of the egg after Gaia stepped out. You see, when the egg cracked open, some pieces broke off and fell away. Pontus was the sea that resulted from those fragments. He represents water and everything that's wet. Now, you're probably wondering why Gaia and Pontus fell in love and had children. Well, we can't really say that they thought or did anything because they were more like concepts than actual beings. But their union gave birth to the first Titans. These beings were the first step towards gods, but they still weren't gods. You see, they were powerful, yes, but they didn't have any super special abilities. They were strong, but they weren't immortal. They could feel emotions, but they didn't have any divine knowledge. Their lives were similar to humans, except they lived longer and were more powerful. They were born out of the union of earth and water, but soon they would clash with each other. The war between the Titans and the giants lasted for years, but neither side could win. The Titans could destroy the mountains, but the earth would regrow them. The giants could flood the land, but the sun would evaporate the water. But this balance didn't last. Gaia was tired of being trodden on by both sides. She wanted someone stronger to rule over the universe, and she knew exactly who to turn to. Uranus, the sky. His influence was felt everywhere, but he was never directly involved in affairs on Earth. Gaia loved Uranus and begged him to save her from the giants. So he reached down and lifted her onto his shoulders, and this made her happy for a while. Gaia and Uranus ruled together until Cronus came along. He was the leader of the Titans, but he wasn't content with his role. He wanted to be a god. After all, he was the son of sky and earth, and he was strong enough to take down the giants. So he fought against his father and castrated him. This is a brutal story, but it's important because it marked a new era in the universe. You see, when Uranus died, his blood dripped to the ground and created the first mortals, the giants. On the one hand, this made the giants mortal. On the other hand, it made them incredibly strong. But that doesn't matter because soon the gods will arrive. Now, the old religions always spoke of the gods arriving, but no one paid any attention. What do a few fishermen or goat herders know about the gods? But the giants knew. They saw the signs in the heavens and they prepared for war. Now, before we wrap up, I want to explain some basic concepts that will help you understand the following episodes. First of all, the Greeks believed in many gods. They had no problem with that. For them, it was normal. That's why we call it polytheism. The opposite is monotheism, or believing in one god. Monotheistic religions became popular later, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Secondly, the Greeks never wrote down their myths. Someone named Hesiod did, but he was heavily influenced by previous poets and storytellers. The point is, the myths change constantly. Sometimes the giants attacked Olympus, and sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the gods helped the heroes, and sometimes they didn't. It all depended on the storyteller and his audience. Thirdly, the Greeks didn't write down their myths in one book, but scattered them throughout many different poems. That's why the myths often contradict each other. Not because the poet made a mistake, but because he was trying to combine all the different stories into one coherent narrative. Alright, now it's time to wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please smash that like button and share it with your friends. This is the first of many adventures through ancient mythology. Subscribe so you won't miss next week's episode. Until then, stay safe and remember John shot first.